So when we talked about fixed exchange rate regimes and other factors, countries have to make choices. So exchange rate policy is monetary policy. If you follow an exchange rate regime, it locks your hands on doing other things. So they have this, author illustrates this as the policy trilemma. So you can be, so the three components of monetary policy, let's start here with independent monetary policy. So you can, I just listened to a thing on Jerome Powell, made some statements. He was cagey as usual. Basically, the Wall Street Journal reporter was trying to pin him down on potential inflation for the economy and that sort of thing. He did confirm, for what it's worth, that if inflation starts to creep above the target, they will use their policy tools to correct that, more or less is what he was saying. He said it in some fluffier language. And we'll see, because my prediction would be that if inflation starts to take off, but yet there's some other issues, they're going to raise their bar. So here's Russ McCullough prediction number one, from 2% to 3%. I think they'll, or maybe it'll be 2.5 or whatever, but I think they'll possibly increase their target and explain it away. He didn't seem to indicate that on this interview, which is interesting. And I hope he's telling the truth. But they will, he leaves their statements nebulous enough that they can kind of waffle around on what they say using their objectives. So, but that's what we have, is independent Fed. And then the thing we haven't talked about as much, mentioned it a few different times in different places, but capital mobility. So what is capital in this class anyway? So I know it's machines and buildings and stuff is the normal econ response, but now that you guys are a little bit higher level of econ here, what are we talking about with capital? Securities, could be securities, money in general, investments, right? So that's generally how it's referred to in finance classes. So we have capital, and the reason I try to be hardcore with it in micro and macro class principles is that really that capital is being used to buy buildings and machines and tools and whatever. So that's kind of how the language has gotten sloppy. So what this means is that you as an American, if you want to sell, if you want to drain your account and go invest in something over in India, you can. You can buy something in India. Your money can leave the United States and do foreign investment in India. That's not true for the Indians. So the country can have controls that say you can only withdraw 10,000 from your account in a given year or something to invest it in something overseas. So they can limit the amount of money that can leave the country. And that restriction can be applied to foreign investments as well. So if Americans put their money in India, they're subject to those rules. Like they knew that going into it, that there was a risk that their money could be locked up. And so capital mobility is something that, of course, the United States has. You can go in and out, something we wouldn't even think twice about. But in other countries, they might say, oh, well, we want to attract you foreigners, come and invest in our country. But, this is the way it works if you come. And then so what they'll do is then they'll say, oh, well, we won't apply that to foreigners, only to our domestic investors. So they can make their rules around, but that is the way the United States operates. So if you choose to have a fixed exchange rate, you can't have all three. That's the trilemma. So if you do a fixed exchange rate, it's going to tie your hands then with one or the other. So Hong Kong preserves capital mobility and ties their exchange rate to the dollar, and China has a fixed exchange rate with giving up their independent monetary policy. So their monetary policy is their exchange rate. If you have a fixed exchange rate, you don't have monetary policy as the Hong Kong model. And then, of course, if you have an independent monetary policy and free capital mobility, you don't have a fixed exchange rate, right? So that's kind of the overlap. Anybody got any questions there? All right. So the last thing I wanted to hit, let's see, there might be a couple here. There's the capital controls. Is dollarization. So when these two, we're going to read this article on the Argentina's case. So when countries have been irresponsible and they ran the printing press, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, all of Hitler, Germany, whatever, you go back through the time when they've inflated their currency through running the printing press. Of course, the general public says, "Oh, I know that trick, right? How many times has the currency been redone in Venezuela in the last 5 years? Like they kind of reset, like there's a new dollar, this is worth a new amount, right? And oh, we know the system's broken, so we're not going to use the Venezuelan dollar, we're going to use the Chavez dollar instead, whatever. They come up with a different name, and it's like all of a sudden tomorrow we're going to use a new currency, and the general public's like, so what? You can't just, because a can of cola is 10,000 Venezuelan dollars, and then tomorrow you dictate that it's one Chavez dollar, right? That somehow that fixes the system, because you're just going to do the same thing you did before and print off 4 Chavez dollars, right? And so how can they fix that problem? They know that they've dug themselves a big hole, but the current government has no credible way to regain the faith of the public without doing some of these other things. And so one of those things is a currency board, where the government says, okay, we're going to let these outsiders determine our currency. We're no longer going to be able to have power to run the printing press. And then the other way is through dollarization. And so this allows the country to just use another country's currency as their own. So I got a short little video here on dollarization. I want to show, let's see, I might be able to just find it on YouTube since we're on here. I think it's dollarization Ecuador, right? Well, it was a video like this. Oh yeah, this is it. Okay. Let's try this.
In this video, I'll be analyzing the effects of dollarization.
I'm going to buzz you through it.
Dollarization and rising. Dollarization is the adoption of one country's currency, in this case, the United States dollar, as legal tender in another country, in this case, Ecuador. In the midst of a financial crisis, and with its domestic currency, the sucre, reaching inflation rates of nearly 97%, Ecuador opted to replace its currency with the US dollar in 2000.
Austin, you got your card game closed?
Now this begs the question of what dollarization's intended purpose is when implemented in an economy. Some of the main objectives of dollarization include protection against inflation and devaluation, and also increased investments. Due to the stability and strength of the US dollar, investing in US dollars represents one of the safest investments.
You can see the effect dollarization has had on Ecuador's inflation rate. Dollarization, however, has led to some negative effects in the Ecuadorian economy. The government can't control monetary policies, thus making them more vulnerable to economic shocks. In the years following the 2008 financial crisis,
So if they use American dollars as their country's currency, what's their monetary policy? It is that, right? So, and then furthermore, if the Americans start causing inflation, what happens in your country? Inflation, right? So you basically handed over the monetary policy and you're subject to them, which isn't bad if the Americans have been good with it. So.
the US dollar has appreciated, thus making exports priced in US dollars more expensive and less competitive to buyers. Despite large increases in public spending, Ecuador's foreign investment level still hasn't been as high or stable as expected. So the question is dollarization beneficial or detrimental to Ecuador's economy? We'll start by analyzing the causes and effects of the low level of foreign investment in Ecuador. Ecuador's foreign investment level has been one of the lowest in Latin America. This is mainly due to the unstable regulatory environment that the Ecuadorian government has produced. This causes potential investors to be very apprehensive about investing their money in Ecuador. For example, in 2009, Ecuador expressed intent to eliminate 13 investment treaties, including one with the United States. In 2013, facing a trade deficit of $1.1 billion, Ecuador created strict trade barriers with some of their most important and closest trade partners. Then, in 2015, surcharges on tariffs were increased from 5% to 45% on an estimated 32% of imports. An unstable regulatory environment and increased tariff surcharges are just two of the ways Ecuador has diminished its reputation to potential investors, which has ultimately led to their very low level of foreign investment. The crowding out effect has also played a large role in the low level of foreign investment in Ecuador. This is a graph of Ecuador's government spending. After dollarizing in 2000, Ecuador drastically increased their government spending. Since then, the spending has continued to grow year by year. Along with the large increase in government spending came a large increase in government borrowing. This borrowing shifts the demand curve of the loanable funds market to the right, thus increasing the interest rate and turning away potential investors. A stable regulatory environment and reduced public spending could help aid the level of foreign investment in Ecuador. Now we'll move on to the.
So when they tie their hands in the monetary policy, this is the comment I think I made on Tuesday, the fiscal side still lives on. So the government can still spend money greater than their taxes, causing the economy to look awful that way, and borrowing money, driving up interest rates is what that last thing was showing, right? So they can still screw it up. And now there's no Federal Reserve, there's no central bank to offset that dumbness, right? So that's the one thing I said about the Fed for the United States, that I'm kind of want to handcuff the Fed and go to Bitcoin or blah, 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 all that stuff, and take away discretionary policy. But there's a part of me that thinks I trust Jerome Powell more than I trust President Biden and President Trump and Congress people and other things on coming up with dumb policies. So I'm a little bit torn on that. And that's what this kind of highlights there with what happened to government spending even after the monetary policy was changed.
So the country is dollarized and they increase their spending on that. Where do they get the dollars from?
Borrow. So they're going to borrow. And then as they borrow more and more, are they more risky or less? More. And as they start to default on some of their other stuff, are they more risky or less? More. So this is the story of Greece and the story of places like this, that eventually a government bond, they have to pay 18% to borrow money for the stupid stuff that they did 5 years ago, right? And so that's when the country basically goes bankrupt. And Germany had to bail out Greece, and other smaller countries looked to the International Monetary Fund for bailout money. And so then we're back to this whole Allison bailout system of how bad that is if we don't let countries fail who did stupid stuff. Dakota, do you have?
I had a question, but I guess I don't know.
Okay, all right, well, keep it on mind. We'll just follow along a little bit more with this, and then we'll be done.
The appreciating U.S. dollar has had on Ecuador's exports. The appreciation of the dollar in recent years has caused exports priced in U.S. dollars to be more expensive. The more the U.S. dollar appreciates, the more expensive it is to buy exports from the U.S. dollar. This causes countries to look elsewhere for their exports. One argument against dollarization is that Ecuador could use internal devaluation if they had control over their monetary policy. Internal devaluation is when a country intentionally decreases the value of its domestic currency. Doing this makes their exports more competitively priced, something that if Ecuador had control of their monetary policy, they could use internal devaluation. They could fix their problem with that. Am I making it?
So devaluation was under fixed exchange rate regimes. Can you do that with dollarization? No. So that's why dollarization is, it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's good because your government is now credibly saying, we're not going to run the printing press. Basically, the US dollar is what we use. So there's no way for them to do it without changing the law and saying, okay, we're not going to accept dollars anymore, right? So it's a credible threat that they don't have the ability to run the printing press or to do the devaluation, but that can cause problems down the road too.
And so how exactly, what would happen if, like you were saying, if they let a government fail, let a country fail, instead of being bailed out?
well, whoever the bondholders were gets screwed. So if there was, fat cats in the United States that said, oh, 18% bond in Ecuador, I'll roll the dice with that. They don't get bailed out, right? So it's basically a reset. So similar to when you personally declare bankruptcy, all the people that you owed money to get screwed, right? And so you don't pay, you reset, you have a resource base, you have your people that are land, then we're back to macro and micro class, land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. Let's restart, right, with a clean slate. If it doesn't lead to bloodshed, which it might, depending on the circumstances.
Their exports more competitively priced. In theory, internal valuation would help Ecuador increase the competitiveness of its non-oil exports. However, oil is priced locally in US dollars, called petrodollars. And because Ecuador relies on oil for 52% of its exports, and oil is priced in petrodollars, this means that internal devaluation would have an effect on less than 50% of Ecuador's exports. Even if Ecuador was de-dollarized, 52% of the money from exports they'd be taking in would be in US dollars. And exchanging these US dollars to their domestic currency would drive the exchange rate up. You can see in this foreign exchange graph that the demand curve would shift to the right to D1, and the exchange rate would rise to E1. This rise in the exchange rate would be enough to cancel out the positive effects of internal devaluation in Ecuador due to the large volume of export revenue being taken in US dollars. Although the appreciating US dollar in recent years has made exports priced in US dollars less competitive than those from other countries, Ecuador stands to gain more from the dollarized economy versus the theoretical alternative of a de-dollarized economy in which they use internal devaluation to increase the competitiveness of exports.
All right, you can see this was a student project, so I'm going to stop that there. And I want to continue our round robin of reading on the currency board. So this is just to kind of give you a couple different ideas of what other countries might need to do if they run into problems. Let's start today. Let's see, Liz, you read last time or not? Okay, we'll start with Liz and kind of work our way to Bryce and sneak our way towards the front of the class here. Let me give you a little bit more. There we go.
Argentina decided to adopt the currency board in April 1971. The Argentine currency board works as follows. Under Argentina's convertibility law, the peso per dollar exchange rate is fixed at 1-to-1. A member of the public would put up to the Argentine central bank and exchange the peso per dollar or vice versa.
Okay, so that's part of it right there that we talk about the gold standard in the United States. In theory, you could take your dollar and go get its weight in gold, right? That was the whole thing, the idea. This is how that's played out with kind of the dollarization concept. This is different with the currency board, but you can always request a dollar for your paper. So if you were ever questioning the value of it, if the bank is forced to give you a dollar for it, they have no incentive to deflate it, right? So that's kind of the functioning part of fixing the currency to something. Okay, who's next, Bryce? Yeah, see, yep.
The early years of Argentina's currency board looked stunningly successful. Inflation, which was running at an 800% annual rate in 1990, fell to less than 5% by the end of 1994. And economic growth was rapid, averaging almost 8% per year from 1991 to 1994. In the aftermath of the Mexican peso crisis, however, concern about the health of the Argentine economy led the public to pull money out of the banks. Deposits fell by 18%, and exchange pesos for dollars, thus causing a contraction of the Argentine money supply. The result was a sharp drop in Argentine economic activity, with real GDP shrinking by more than 5% in 1995, and the unemployment rate jumping above 15%. Only in 1996 did the economy begin to recover.
Okay, next reader.
Because the Central Bank of Argentina had no control over monetary policy under the currency board system, it was virtually helpless to counteract the contradictory monetary effects stemming from the public's behavior. Furthermore, because the currency board did not allow the central bank to create pesos and lend them to the banks, it had very little capability to act as a lender of last resort. with help from international agencies such as the IMF, the World Bank, and the Inter-American Development Bank, which lent Argentina more than $5 billion in 1995 to help shore up its banking system. The currency board's about.
So in general, we lost our lender of last resort that we used the Fed for, right? That the Fed can basically support some other one. And now we had to rely on somebody else to kind of be that bailout mechanism. The difference is that with the Federal Reserve, remember, everybody has required reserves from across the nation that's pooling into the Fed. And so that money will kind of come back. Here, we're talking real money coming from the outside in. It's a little bit different. They were never paying into anything. It was truly kind of a bailout type of situation. All right, next reader.
In 1998, however, Argentina entered another recession, one that was both severe and very long-lasting. By the end of 2001, unemployment had reached nearly 20%, a level comparable to that experienced in the United States during the Great Depression of the 1930s. The result was civil unrest and the fall of the elected government, as well as a major banking crisis and a default of nearly $150 billion of government debt. Because the Central Bank of Argentina had no control over monetary policy under the currency board system, it was unable to use monetary policy to expand the economy and get Argentina out of its recession. In addition, because the currency board limited the central bank's ability to create pesos and act as a lender of last resort, the central bank was unable to help banks weather the banking crisis. In January 2002, the currency board finally collapsed. The peso depreciated by more than 70%, and inflation shot through the roof. The result was a full-scale financial crisis that led to an extremely severe depression. Clearly, the Argentine public is not as enamored of its currency board as it once was.
Okay, so that's kind of gives you a flavor for different things people try to do to fix things, and then other problems arise. Again, we kind of take all that for granted because our Fed, at least up to this point, at least for the last 30 years, Jerome Powell did mention the 60s and 70s inflation and that we never want to get there. He even kind of personally said, I was a college student back there and back then entering the job market in the high inflation era, and I don't want to live through that. I kind of like that he said that. So maybe he's gaining some credibility. We'll see if they're able to do it. But it can be kind of a mess without the proper institutions in place. Okay, let's talk about the final. Unless anybody has any comments or questions as I pass these out. All right, so let me put one of these on the overhead so you guys can start memorizing it. All right. Take one, pass it back. Take one, pass it back. Forward.
I guess I didn't have the look out for long. Yeah, no joke.
Did you end up getting your book from the website you ordered it from? Yeah. Came a little late. A little bit later, but yeah, everything came in.
How many questions do you think is gonna be on it?
He'll decide that's.
Yeah, I haven't written it yet, so. So just a reminder of what we're doing for an A. If you guys, so I did this so that you kind of have to prove up your A if you were really good at taking my econ lab stuff for whatever reason, or the homework, and you've got a 99% going into the final. Of course, that would give you the opportunity with the weighting of the final to just blow it up. And I don't want you to blow it up. I want you to prove up your A, so to speak. So if you did have a high grade to earn an A for the course, you must earn at least 70% on the final exam and earn at least 90% on the overall, on the other points in the class, excluding the final. So basically what you have going into the final, you have to cover both of these things. So if you have a 90 and a 70, otherwise you're going to get what you get is what it'll amount, whatever your overall percentage was. It would drop. I doubt you would drop to a C, but I don't know. I haven't done the math. Maybe you could. I don't think it's weighted enough to be able to do that, but it might be close. If you totally blew it off and got a 0, you might do that. And then to earn be 80%, at least to 60%, which I'm not asking for much, right? I'm saying you just can't totally blow it off. Okay, questions on that?
Just one.
Okay, so it is comprehensive, and
Hey, Rob,
I've got, yes.
sorry, are you gonna have the online stuff in Blackboard so we know what our grade is before we go into it tomorrow? Because it's not in there yet, it's just a discussion.
Oh, you mean have it combined?
Yeah, all like one school.
Yeah, most of you have it up there. The answer is no, but I probably could. I wasn't planning on it. It was really, since most of you got those points, I guess it could be a little bit of an issue, so if you want me to, I could. I'll probably give you a formula to do it on your own. So the MyEcon Lab, I think, makes up 80% of your weight. So if you take 80% times your percentage in MyEcon Lab plus the fraction that the discussion boards make up, you can calculate your overall percentage. I'll show you how to do it, but I'm just telling you, I'll probably do that, and that way you can look at your overall percentage in your discussion boards, and then weight that into it. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, Isaac?
I figured out how to word it. So last semester for money and banking, you said this final will be hard. The average I expect to be about 60. The average is 50. Is that the same going into this one? You expect it to be hard. The average to be about 50.
Yeah, I mean, you should expect it to be hard. I don't know about the average. We'll see how you guys do. If you've done your work diligently through the class, I mean, you should be able to get a decent grade on it. If you kind of hunt and picked your way and didn't really come to class and did, kind of made your way that way through the course, if you kind of sloughed along. That's why I created the system, so that I think it'll be fair for you to at least be able to get that to prove up your overall grade. Marco?
My text is not working. Do you know maybe how can I?
Your what?
My text, the book on Pearson is not working.
See me after class. Okay, so here's the chapters. On the back side, just by the way, just to kind of give you an overview, is kind of the second half. So that has all the chapters listed of the textbook stuff as we work through this. And then I've got some comments for Allison down here. And on the front page, I've got the Skousen comments. So some of the content will be a little bit of these topics. I think I'm pointing you to these topics to kind of narrow things down a little bit more for you. So what's a risk premium? What's a risk structure? What's a yield curve? I mean, that can be kind of a big question, but that would get you started for kind of looking at those things within the chapter. And then the stock market, efficient market hypothesis, spent some time on that, rational expectations. So I'm not saying that this is the only thing the test is going to be on, but it would give you a way to narrow it down. When you get to the other chapters, we got, of course, our basics that we've talked about really in the Allison book, even in Skousen in the textbook, asymmetric information, moral hazard, adverse selection, principal agent problem, and then financial crisis, some of the words that we use, too big to fail, collateralized debt obligations, that's kind of financial crisis related, which also comes out from the Allison book. Again, when chapter 10, when we get into these different policies, I want you to focus to the concepts rather than dates and fine details. So I'm not asking you to, some of those questions were tough on my Econ Lab that were like, what year did this or that occur? I'm not going to do that on this final. So don't waste your time studying that type of thing, but have the concepts down. There might be something with Basel Accord, but I'm not going to ask some fine detail of what was, item number 4 or whatever. But what did the Basel Accord do? What did banks have to do after the Basel Accord? What did they have to do? You guys tell me. In general, like if I'm telling you kind of conceptually, when these policies, we could talk even Dodd-Frank or Basel Accord, what did banks have to do that was different than what they did before? What did they have to do with capital requirements? Increase, right? So just kind of know some of those generalities. FDIC insurance, I'm not asking you to know every line item detail of FDIC, but what's the FDIC maximum? 250. You should know some generals like that. And then that applies to the, the bank accounts that you have. So with each institution. So then on the Skousen book, I'm going to narrow your focus to these chapters reference concepts of Main Street, Wall Street, and banks. So kind of keep your focus on that. You can kind of, run through your comments that you did maybe on Blackboard and just open up the book. And if you start thumbing through it, hopefully you'll be like, oh yeah, I remember talking about that. Wow, that was really fun. That was a long time ago. That was like 6 weeks ago. But yeah, that was kind of interesting. But you can keep your focus on Main Street, Wall Street, and Vegas. He made some important contributions, I think, in framing things that way. And then the last thing was fairly specific. There was 3 vital principles that he identified in chapter 5, the perversity of Mr. Market. So study those principles and kind of have an understanding of those. Dan?
What's the book that we talked about Detroit a lot, shut down the gene promoters and stuff? Like a lot. I don't remember what.
It was the very first thing we read before Allison.
I know, but I don't remember what.
It was, here, I'll help you out a little bit. I don't remember the Detroit thing being a big thing, but he might have had stuff. But the whole Main Street versus Wall Street, is this your business? Trying to go to, what's your story? What's your business? The rocky marriage, kind of the dance that you have between the investments of the valuation of a stock versus the motivations associated with that, and the valuation of a pizza time on Main Street, right? So he kind of worked through, and that's kind of part of the Main Street, Wall Street type of thing. So go through and review that, but you can keep your focus on those concepts from those particular chapters. All right, any other questions on Skousen or the first half? All right, flip it over. You might want to highlight this one. No formula sheets for this. So memorize the present value formula. All graduates from my class, at least the economics majors, but I'd like to think all business majors, I would love to come to a day where you all have that memorized. So what is the present value formula?
Future value over
Future value, so present value equals future value over to the n power. So know that. Now that's one way of looking at it, but what if it's over a multiple years? So you can do plus.
In future value 1 plus and then n is just the number of years.
So this is, n is now a 1. So a time period 1 has
Zero.
this. Time period 0.
First one, zero.
First one 0. What would make the first one 0? What if you have something divided by 0? What is it?
Today.
It's today. You got it today. So we're usually starting this off of the present value of something coming in the future. So yes, it's possible that you'd have something today and it would be 0 if there was something of the income stream. I think we did that with that one exercise with the lottery. The lottery that you got your first lottery payment came today, and then for the next 19 years because it was a 20-year payout or whatever. So yes.
You won't be asking us any big ones. I remember for that one, we had to like plug in, figure out what.
No, I'm not asking, you're not going to need Excel or anything, but you might need to pull out your calculator to do a simple one possibly. So basic calculator, make sure you bring that. So 1 plus I raised to the 2 power plus the future value of the nth period divided by 1 plus, I'm running out of board space, but to the n power, or the sum of the future value from I equals 1 to n of fi divided by 1 plus, I guess I shouldn't use I, let's make this a k, fk plus I raised to the nth power. This is the shorthand notation we used for that equation, right? These are one and the same. This is just the shorthand way of doing it. So that's what you need. That's the present value formula you need to know. Remember, you've got multiple time frames, investments coming in. This is so fundamental, whether you're buying a classic car, buying a mutual fund, buying GameStop, buying a duplex, a rental property, whatever you're doing, this is what underlies analyzing the investment. All right, Lawson.
So there's no formula sheet at all? Are there gonna be a lot of formula problems?
I'm telling you what you need to know. So don't memorize too many, but there were some other formulas that you should know the basics of. I think if you know this one, the rest of them kind of fall into place. All right, and that's what I've been trying to hammer down. All of those formulas. Well, this was even in money and banking class, I think, right? When we laid them all out with bonds and stuff. But all of them fall back, kind of collapse down to that one. Okay. Then we've got chapter 13, insurance, finance companies, mutual funds. So basically was non-bank was the name of the chapter. And so we looked at all the different types of financial intermediaries, just kind of knowing, what is an insurance company. We talked a little bit about the insurance business of they collect premiums and they have to pay out stuff. Why are they involved in the financial system? Because it's a life insurance policy. It's 30 years from now. I'm going to collect your premiums and I'm going to put them in the financial markets. I'm going to invest in bonds. I'm going to invest in stocks. I'm going to do something with that money to make a return. So kind of the general setup of those things. Chapter 14, I put review your notes from class. So some of this will have examples that we went through, that I went through on the board in some cases, hedging, the forward contracts, the apple pie and the apple, that sort of stuff, knowing how those work, the interest rate swaps. Chapter 15, again, this is one of those to stick to concepts rather than dates and find details. So conflicts of interest was part of it. And then we got into the kind of back into the regulation stuff there. So I wouldn't spend a lot of time of your studies with that. Just kind of make sure you refresh your mind of the basics. And then we're into the stuff we just got out of. Chapter 20, foreign exchange market, purchasing power parity, factors that change exchange rates, interest rate parity was the appendix. And then 21, what we're just coming out of here, the sterilized, unsterilized intervention. The gold, when I say gold standard bred bloods, it's just the basics that it's possible to have it fixed, and then the fixed and flexible exchange rates. And then review the problems we went through in class. So all of those worksheets and stuff that we did that you guys hopefully hung on to, you might see some problems like that. Hint, hint. So that's why we went through them in class. That's why I gave you the answers in class. And so if you weren't here for those, you can borrow some notes from a neighbor, or they were on the recordings. You can go back and look at the recordings if you wanted to do that. But and make sure you know how to work through some of those problems. And then Allison, I already mentioned, memorize the 6, so edit that to the 7. I don't know why I had 6 multiple times.
I swear it's.
I really thought it was.
You can do 6 out of the 7.
Well, that's for me to determine when I write the test, whether I'm going to have them. But I'm telling you, for study purposes, memorize the 7 policy recommendations. Have a general idea of each recommendation as provided in chapter 19. All right, so the rest of the review thing, I thought I would go through the notes just so that you can put eyeballs on some of those problems we did do in class. So let me.
Is it going to be like from all throughout the semester, or are there specific chapters that we should know more about for those problems?
All those chapters are all of the chapters for the semester.
No, I meant for like the problem we did in class.
Is there ones to? No, all of them we did in class are fair game. So review if that's what you're asking. So chapter 6, I have to kind of look to remember what we did or not. There, this one is the one I was thinking about. So we did this one where we had the stock price with the Gordon growth model. So again, we were really just applying the present value formula there. And the Gordon growth model is a little bit specific, but look that over with the growth rates, and that was with stock valuation. So that was chapter 7. If you're keeping notes here. Here's chapter 8. We had this one. Let me just go to the page with the answer. So we worked through the used car market, the lemons problem of what would be the expected value. So this formula is another basic formula of what's the expected value of X, the probability that this event will happen, the probability that this event will happen, add them together, and that's your expected value. Those are formulas that you should know. And then this one was 22, and then we had the insurance stuff. We had the lazy worker, hard worker, and how much of a commission deal we should do. And then this one with the, you own a house that floods. Remember that one? Expected loss with the seawall, without the seawall. So that's chapter 8. In your notes, we had the credit default swaps. Some of that stuff where we did where Corporation A with AIG, that should be in your notes. Hedge funds on how they can do little side bets was one of the problems that maybe helped contribute to the financial crisis as well. So those are things that should be just in your straight notes that were a little bit outside of textbook PowerPoint-y type of things. It's stuff that I covered in class. Short selling, since we had the big GameStop thing, we talked about short selling. Market capitalization. So we've got two, I brought you through the two companies. One has a price of $10 for their stock. One has a price of $1. Which one should I buy? Well, they could be equal buys, right? Using the number of shares outstanding for market capitalization. Mark to market, this was with how the banks have to adjust their portfolio down where a toy store might not. Mark to market. Here's the Basel Accord. Again, I'm not going to be, anything I would give you would have, directions. You wouldn't have to know some sort of weird thing like that particular problem that I think you maybe have to know, maybe, or one of these like 20% of something or other had to be held back, or I'll give you all of that stuff if you're asked to do a problem like that. And this was with capital reserves for Old Hat Financial. Chapter 13 is the insurance companies, which I think we had something right here. Oh, this was the hedge fund structure. So we saw a little bit of that with even the video we did Tuesday. Just again, I'm not going to ask you to lay this all out, but put your eyeballs on it, on kind of the general way that hedge funds are structured. You've got a manager that manages the fund, silent partners, active partners. Just give that a quick review. Here's the insurance policy one. Your rich uncle dies. This was the Keo Outfitters here. And where's my rich uncle dying? This is this one. So your rich uncle dies, leaves you a life insurance of $100,000 for 20 years. What option should you do? And then this is the Keo Outfitters at the probability of default. You're basically pretending like you're the insurance company on what the premium would be. Here's the forward contract with the apple pie and apple producer. Margin requirements on how we can keep people honest with their accounts. You might have to fulfill your margin. Stock options. So we had the American option, the European option on the buy sell. We kind of analyzed, this whole thing kind of analyzed the different long position, short position, call option, put option. So just the difference between doing those sorts of investments and the impact that it would be. Interest rate swap. So where two companies, one wants a variable rate, the other one wants a fixed rate, you can effectively swap the interest rates with a contract. And we went through that exercise. Gosh, look at all the fun stuff we did. Hedging strategies for market risk. That was the idea. When the market's up or the market's down, you can play the market a little bit differently. And the pension fund. This was chapter 14. All of these, by the way, are on your Blackboard. Remember, some of those that were online, I posted these links on Blackboard for the blanks. So you are trying to hedge with forward and futures contracts. So we worked through some of those problems. Chapter 15, this was more reading comprehension type of stuff for 15. Shorting, this was just another thing that we did on shorting, on whether it was bad or not, but it turns out to make the market a little bit more efficient. Big Mac, arbitrage, purchasing power parity. We learned how you guys can make millions by buying Big Macs in Tijuana and bringing them across the border, right? So knowing about arbitrage. Let's see, this one, I think you guys had some problems with calculating exchange rates. So German sports car, we did kind of some manipulations of the exchange rates. And then we're down to present day. So piece of cake, you guys have an easy night ahead of you. Any questions?
So, calculating how much points you get, how much was the extra credit worth?
I don't, each class was a little bit different, so I'll have that factored in, but it was more or less either a homework problem or a discussion board problem, roughly in terms of the whole allocation of points.
For the movie night?
Yeah, or any other, there was another extra credit opportunity too, but it was just a movie night this time. Okay.
There's an extra opportunity right now when I make this in the trash can.
You may try, but you will get no extra credit.
I
I still have to do this 27 times with everybody.
Whoa.
All right, so that is it. You guys reach out to me if you got any other questions. Otherwise, I'll see you in class at class time.